Hey, it's Jennifer Wayland, and I am here to talk about COVID testing. Oftentimes, our guests are asking, what kind of test do I need, and what is it going to be like? So, I'm here to basically differentiate the tests that are out there for you so that you know what things like PCR mean, and antigen and antibody tests, and what the differences are, and which one you're going to need to travel. And also, I've been tested twice due to travel, so I want to describe what my experience was like because I often hear, like, I hear it's going to hurt. And so I'll let you know what my experience was like. So first I want to talk about the PCR test that we hear the most about. So this is the test that is really the most effective for determining if you have COVID. And so this test is usually like a nasal or a throat swab. And sometimes you can test while you wait. Sometimes it has to be sent to the lab, and then you find out within hours, within days, within a week. I've had even very different experiences myself taking the test in different places. And so a positive test means that the person being tested has an active COVID infection. However, a negative test means that the person was probably not infected at the time their sample was taken. It only means that they didn't have COVID at the time of testing. It can be used to determine who has an active infection. It can help identify people who are contagious to others. So that is the PCR COVID testing. It does not help to determine who has had an infection in the past. So similar to the PCR testing is the antigen test. And the antigen test looks for protein. So the PCR test looks for the virus and in the swab, and the antigen test looks for proteins that make up the virus. And so, like the PCR test, it's usually taken with a nasal or throat swab sent to the lab. If it's positive, it means that the person is infected and contagious. But something to note is an antigen test really isn't as effective as the PCR test. A negative antigen test means that the proteins were not detected. However, a negative test does not rule out COVID. If there is a reason to believe that you still have COVID after the negative antigen test, then a person should be tested again with that PCR test. Antigen tests are less sensitive than the PCR tests, meaning there may be false negative results. So keep that in mind if you're given options or looking into options for testing. An antibody test is basically exactly what it sounds like. Serology is what it's often called, a serology test. It looks for antibodies against COVID in the blood to determine if there was a past infection. So in most cases, a blood sample is taken and sent to the lab. And a positive antibody test means that the person being tested was infected with COVID in the past and that their immune system developed these antibodies to try to fight it off. It may be negative if it's used too close to the beginning of an infection, which is why it should not be used to detect COVID infections. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, the FDA has approved the saliva testing. This is often used like by the airline sometimes even to board a flight. It's just as, if not more effective than the PCR testing and can be detected in as much as 30 minutes. Vendors are selling it online like home testing. So you can actually get a home saliva COVID test. Although I've heard, just FYI, that there's some fake tests going around. So you need to be very careful about the vendor that you're purchasing this test from. In universities, including the U of I here in my hometown, I imagine this is just part of their orientation. So you get your housing information, your dining card, your ID card, and you also submit your saliva sample. So what is it like to get a PCR test? They do take a, like a nasal swab that you get like when you're testing for strep throat. It's about this long, the length of like an emery board. And so the first time I had it, they told me to lodge it up as far as I could. Um, and then when I got to like, they could tell it was an uncomfortable place, they said, that's fine. And then just twirl it. And on the end of this swab is something that really reminds me of the smell of like compound W. So it can often make you like sneeze, your eyes water, your nose run. And that is totally normal, whether you are, you have the active virus or you don't. So whether you're negative or positive. And then you take it out and lodge it up into your other nostril and again swirl it around, and they count to 15. So they let me decide, do you want to do it or do you want me to do it? So I did it myself, and that's how it was. It was uncomfortable, but it did not hurt at all. Then I got it again weeks later after traveling, and they really just didn't even offer for me to do it myself. And they just took the very end of the swab and they just did a swab inside my nostril on both sides. And they just swirled it around and counted to like 15. And the one I took in out of state took like a week to get it back. And that was the one where I lodged it up. And then the one with just the nasal swab was local in my hometown, and it just took within 48 hours. So I hope that's helpful to you, so that you're not dreading it or anything like that, or you kind of have an idea of what is necessary before you travel when we tell you you need this PCR test, or even when you're asked to take a saliva test or a PCR test or antigen test when you are traveling or for work or something like that. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions about traveling and where you can travel to, you can always call us at Island Travel Group at 877-933-2929, or you can email us travel@islandtravelgroup.com, or visit our website at islandtravelgroup.com. We look forward to seeing you, and thanks again for joining me here live at Island Travel Group and Events. Have a great rest of your week.